Hello everyone, welcome to Friday, welcome to another TechSnack. My name is Pavel, I'm an engineering manager at EPAM, and today I want to talk with you regarding a very interesting topic, something which is kind of partially clickbait. I really want you to stop doing code review. And in this case, the most important word is actually code review. So why I'm saying like this, like what do I mean? Of course, code review is required on every project, right? Well, the problem is that currently we live in a situation when the code itself is not the main output. So it's quite easy not to just write the code, but also to generate it using AI, which means that when you see like a perfectly looking code, it might do something completely wrong. So we need to understand like how, when we are talking about the code generation or something that we see in our pull requests or merge requests, how can we be sure that everything is correct? So let's take a look at this example. Imagine that this is kind of a change. So this is, I don't know, like a pull request with something that you provided. So obviously, if someone will take a look at this, they will see one specific thing here, which is basically just a broken window. So each time when you see some pull request with some really obvious thing, this is the first thing that you see, this is the main thing that you see. And usually you will start writing some comments regarding this. You will definitely ask a creator of this pull request to fix this problem. And in many cases, if you will see something like this, you will probably even didn't notice like other potential problems. Take a look at this picture in more details. To be more precise, can you take a look at the bottom right part? You can see that the window at this part is actually quite different from the one that we have in other ones. Well, maybe not quite, but at least you can see that we do have like this kind of split of this window, and we do have in the top part, we have 4 smaller squares instead of like just 2 rectangles. So this is an example of some logic that might look, well, let's imagine that it looks okay. What we will definitely see that something is just wrong in the overall change. So my idea is that we do need to review what we are doing, but we don't need to review only the code. We need to review the logic. So let's start doing functionality review, or let's start doing logic review. To discuss this in more details, I decided to just try to collect some information regarding potential things that you need to consider during the code review. And we'll try to cover this in terms of our current reality, when AI can be used to simply generate the code and quite quickly solve our problem. We are going to go through some aspects, and I'm going to try to cover most of them with some specific cases, and we'll try to cover them with some examples that I'm currently seeing on my projects. So the first thing that you're thinking about the code review, usually you're checking the code quality. You're making sure that you can read the code, that you kind of understand the code. So basically you need to ensure that the code is clear, well organized, and easy to understand, which is not really hard to do with AI. But you need to remember that AI generates something by default using its own kind of set of predefined data, let's call it like this. It doesn't mean that it just uses some boilerplate, it means that it just knows how to generate something, and with default settings it will not generate something specifically for your project until you actually ask it to do so. So it's very important to remember that the code generated by AI might look really nice, but it will not be in 100% cases completely the same in terms of style guides of the project, which might a little bit complicate the review or like overall support of the application in the future. The next part, which is obviously the main probably, and something that I really want you to think about, is functionality and correctness, which means that the code generated or the code written is actually something that is required for a specific feature. So just make sure that you understand like what is going on there, why this code actually exists. Like, Does it implement the feature as it should? Which doesn't mean that you need to basically go through all requirements, check them for someone who prepared the code. It means that you just need to understand that sometimes people who just generate the code might not cover all possible cases. So you need to think about this and make sure that, well, you are kind of like a second line of check that also verifies that everything is done. The next part, coding standards. So partially mentioned already, we are usually working with some coding standards. We are working with some style guides. Of course, we are trying to work with some best practices, but AI specifically, for example, does not always generate something perfectly. Like usually its task is to generate something to respond to you with your request, which means that if you will not cover some places like this, basically AI will not do this for you. So I highly recommend you to make sure that all the practices and something that is done by developer or by AI is actually like something that is expected from this code. And the next part, which is very important in terms of actual functionality of the application, or we might say like functional and non-functional requirements, is performance and efficiency. So we understand that code generation basically just fix some problem for you. So you request a code, it generates a code. It's not always the perfect code. Sometimes it does not cover specific cases. So it actually makes sense to make sure that you by default cover some performance things, some bottlenecks. You think about how this code will actually work in your real environment, because usually you are not kind of uploading information about your customers into AI. The same way you cannot upload all the information in some people's mind. So you need to think about how this code will work. And here I might have one tip for you that I might recommend to you, especially if you're working with some things like Copilot, something that basically just have an access to your code. Ask it to make a code review for you. Specifically, ask it to basically check if the performance is okay. It might, of course, tell you that something is wrong if you will specify the prompt that it should find something. But overall, just let it check the code, let it verify it, let it find some details. Sometimes it might actually find something that you miss. So just think about this. The next part. So it's more about the kind of integration part, about the support of this. So of course, like one of very important part of overall engineering experience is that we need to make sure that we do have a coverage, because you won't be able to manually check everything. You need to have some tests. And with the help of AI, it's pretty simple to basically just generate some tests, to verify these tests, to run them more. So I would recommend you to make sure that when you are looking into some code during the code review, you actually consider that there is coverage, that this coverage is basically just covering all the cases. So even outside of any way to write the code, I usually see a problem when people write some code trying to write some tests trying to cover the functionality more using the coverage tool rather than using some specific cases. So I would recommend you to think about this, to think about how your application is actually working. Does your tests actually check in these cases? And consider different types of tests and think about like how even AI can help you with basically just checking something. And in case if you see that it's possible to quickly cover some case, it can simply help you with generating the case. The next part about maintainability is an interesting one, because usually when we are working with any code generation, or overall when we are writing some code, we are thinking about especially some new features as a kind of just new extension to your code. So you basically just kind of trying to create a box that does something. And here, when you create this box, by default, it probably works great. And outside of the main system, well, it will kind of just work. And the problem, it begins when you need to think about how you will actually use this box maybe in a different situation. So overall, like reusability of the code is very important. So you need to remember about other cases when you might need some functionality that you are reviewing or that you are writing. So I highly recommend you to think how this code will work in the future. Like if you are looking into some merge request and you see that someone implemented, I don't know, a button, you probably need to consider, well, will this button always look like this? Will it always contain the same text or something like this? So this is a very important one, and I will actually jump through one and I will extend my topic with some integration and compatibility because as I already mentioned, the generated code or the code that you are writing to fix a specific feature sometimes actually just doing one specific thing that you are implementing. It might, of course, contain multiple functionality in one, but overall, it's still kinda a black box for most of other developers. So I recommend you to actually take a look at this as a part of the system. Think how you personally can use this code if, for example, you would work on this feature or if you will work on a different feature. When someone is generating the code, they basically also need to consider how this will work with external API. The funny thing here, and I can probably tell you a little story about one of my projects. So I'm working with a low-code platform, which means that I do have some communication with some internal systems, which I'm using sometimes when I need to create a custom functionality. And once I needed to implement the functionality that would be able to basically kind of just check internal data, something that we're using to just generate the page. But I needed to use it on the JavaScript level. So I did some research. I haven't found any kind of API, SDK, nothing that might help me with this. And I decided just to try to ask AI whether it can just find me something that I wasn't able to find because of like a giant set of documentation. And AI was very responsive. It actually generated me a pretty nice kind of API. So it told me that if I'm working with the system, I actually have a service which I can use. So there is even a method that can provide me all the data that I need. So I basically just need to call one function. I thought that it's great. I mean, like, it's definitely fixing my problem. I, at the same time, I went to the application. I've tried to look for this API. It does not exist. Like, AI just kind of generated the idea that some API that I need, like at this point, just exists, but it never existed in this application. I even tried to Google, I tried to search for their internal forums, try to search for some issues. No, I don't know, it's just generated it. And that's a very important thing that when you are working with something externally or when someone else is working with something externally, you need to 100% sure that if they are using this external tool, it's actually working like this. Especially remembering that some libraries which you are developing or which you are using, which was added by, I don't know, Facebook, Google or someone else, they are basically just changing their APIs, they're changing their functionality, so something is definitely might be missing. Which actually leads to the last point in this section. Interestingly, it's a documentation. So we all know this type of project when you come, ask where is the documentation, and team lead is saying I'm a documentation. So we might say that it's a typical situation because no one actually likes to write documentation. The interesting part and probably the most positive part is that AI actually quite helpful in terms of generating documentation. And I'm talking about different types of documentation. You can simply generate documentation based on like some comments for a specific, I don't know, a class or a method based on the code. It might actually generate you more specific, I don't know, README file or overall some text that will describe the flow based on your API or based on how you're working with some API. But what I figured during last couple of weeks is that actually when you do have a data, AI can generate some very interesting things. For example, it can generate plant UML schema that will describe the whole process. So documentation, of course, it's something that is kind of, well, you definitely don't think about how you will write documentation for a feature that you provided, but knowing that AI can actually generate it quite simply, you might consider a possibility to use AI for some help with this. And you might also use it to basically analyze those changes and provide you some details if you don't fully understand the logic. Well, of course, like if you don't fully understand the logic, that also might mean that the logic itself is very complicated. It's a more complex topic, so let's not stick with this one. There are two more aspects, and both of them are really, really important in all services and applications. I would say specifically right now, because I think like at this stage, almost everyone trying to kind of break your application for some reason. Well, the reason is obvious. Most of them, they just want some money from you. So it means that if someone wants to break your application, they will probably break it if you are not considering security. You need to think about some vulnerabilities. You need to think about how the code is actually kind of working. You need to think even about the data that was generated. You need to make sure that you are not actually letting AI know some personal data, that you letting know some data in your Git and so on and so on. So consider the security as one of the most important things in each and every application, and make sure that you're actually thinking like what will happen in case if something will break in your application. So just an obvious case, if I know Google breaks again and half of the internet is broken again, like what will happen with your APIs? If user will see just 500 error in browser, typical user won't actually understand like what is going on. So at least like consider some possible cases how to handle some things. And the last thing, potential bugs and errors. So the code, whether it was written, whether it was generated, is still the code. And I think almost every code might contain some bug. So of course, when you're considering the functionality, try to be a QA a little bit. Try to break this functionality. Think of possible cases. Think of the data that might actually come to your function. I don't know. Think of how other users will actually use your functionality that you either develop or generate. And that might actually help you to find some bugs even on earlier stages. And we covered already quite a lot of cases. There are a lot of different aspects. And of course, like you do need to think about all of these, but like what changes, like whether it's just code written or whether it's code generated, like what actually might go wrong. What of course, there might be some bugs, there might be some problems in the styles and so on. So let's try to cover something that might be related to a specifically generated code, something that might be quite new for you. So first thing, integration. As I mentioned already, AI usually generates something based on a very specific task, especially if you are not integrating directly in the code, if it does not have all the context, if it basically don't know like what your main application is doing or not considering everything. The code generated might work for a specific case, but it does not guarantee that it will work for all cases that you require. So make sure that when you generate the code, when you check the code that was generated, that the context of this, that the functionality is actually working as a part of integration. Make sure that when you will try to use this in a little bit different context, it will not break completely. Of course, you need to think about the functionality. You need to understand like what this functionality does. You need to understand why it's done like this. And I might say that it's not directly related only to AI generated code. Of course, it's related to like any functionality. And the last but not least, it's really possible to hide some bugs in the code, which you won't consider if you are not analyzing the code like in details. So the it's very important to understand like why specifically these lines of code were provided to you. And if you are checking to this, if you're checking with different samples, you might be able to find some hidden issues, and you might actually find even better solutions for something, even if the code was generated by AI, which was kind of trained to fix a specific problem. So what to do? Here is just like a couple of things, tips, some suggestions for you. If you are planning to work with AI, if you are reviewing the code that was generated by AI, or even if you are just working with some code, no matter whether AI was used or not, I highly recommend you to making sure you understand why the code was written. There are hundreds of different solutions for one specific issue, which means that hundreds of developers could possibly generate hundreds of different solutions. And AI can generate also a lot of different solutions. Like one prompt for a specific problem might generate you thousands of different ways to fix the problem. So try to think like why it's like this, what it does, can it be done differently, or something like this. Especially if it's just AI generated, it should be pretty easier to just like regenerate something or update something. You need to verify the code to find hidden issues. And here is kind of the second tip, that you can actually use AI also not only to check for some performance issues, you might actually use AI just for code review. I mean, it doesn't mean that AI should just verify the code that was generated by a different AI. It means that you can apply it as a part of the SDLC process. You might just add it as an additional step, something like an additional code reviewer that might also check your code and tell you about something. At some stage, if you will be reviewing the code, for example, in the morning before the morning cup of coffee, you might actually miss something, while AI as a tool will be able to help you with this. I highly recommend you to think about running tests just to verify that nothing is broken. Tests are very important, and when you can quickly generate something and when you kind of approve that the generated test is actually doing what it's supposed to do, it makes sense to run them. It makes sense to include them into the process and make sure that they actually run correctly. You can also apply AI to basically kind of verify your tests. Just ask AI to check that the test that was generated is actually checking what it should does. Ask it to generate other cases based on this one. It might actually try to pass a different data, and some of the data might break your functionality. And the last one, review your review. It's a common thing that you're always learning. You're always learning how to implement something. You're always learning about new processes. So I recommend you to learn not only based on someone else's experience, but also on your own experience. If you do have some issues in the code that was generated, that was missing during the code review, it's a good way, it's like a good point to actually stop, consider like what was done, why you missed it, what can be improved in this with the help of AI or without the AI. So you might consider some cases like this as a constant learning based on some previous steps that were done. And similar to AI that can learn based on some previous decisions, context, and your answers, you are better than AI. You can definitely learn how to use tools like AI in the most perfect way to basically solve your problems. So at this stage, I think I need to stop. I need to tell again that I wish you will do more uh, functionality review or more logic review, and we'll do less just code review. So consider code not just as a text, but consider code as a thing that actually solving someone else's problem. Thank you very much. And do you have any questions? Okay, so looks like no, which means that we are done for today. Thank you, everyone. I hope you will consider some of points that I've mentioned. I recommend you to try to use AI in some processes that you probably haven't tried yet. And wish you all the luck with all the future functionality that you will provide or that you will review. Thank you again. Have a great Friday. Have a good weekend. And bye bye.